Hello, and welcome to It's All About Choices. My name is David Barrow, and for those of you that don't know me, I've been working in IT service-related roles for 29 years. 2023 will mark my 30th year in the workplace, and those years have really flown by. I approach my 30-year milestone. I've decided that it's time to reflect on the choices that I've made that have led me up to today. Now, I do this not just for myself, but because I think it would be great to share these experiences in order to help others on their career journeys who face similar choices to those that my guests and I have faced. And so this is the show where my guests and I will discuss our lives and our careers, framed through the choices that we've made, some good and some bad. And we'll explore the choices of my network of colleagues, customers, mentors, and great friends who are willing to share their experiences via the choices they have made during their lives and careers in IT or elsewhere. Each episode of It's All About Choices will begin with a period on my own journey, and my guest will be somebody I first met at that time. And here in episode 5 of It's All About Choices, I'll be speaking with John Douglas Oram, or Doug, as I'm now privileged to know him. Back in 2005, I made a huge choice for me at the time. I took my first steps out of the sanctuary of IBM Global Services, and I stepped into a whole new mad world of investment management. It was a choice to leap into the unknown, which, if I'm honest, could have ended in failure had it not been for Doug's guidance during some turbulent times. But Doug himself was no stranger to leaping into the unknown. Doug grew up in Kentucky in the United States, and Doug's choices took him to London and then into Europe before returning to the UK. And amongst his engagements, Doug was pivotal in delivering service management expertise to the UK's Department for Health and Social Care during the COVID pandemic. So please join Doug and I as we reflect on the choices that led to us working together, the choices that we've made since, and the choices that are still to come. And if you're watching us via YouTube or LinkedIn, please feel free to drop in and ask questions or simply say hello. We'd really love to hear from you, and we'll do our very best to cover any questions as we progress through the conversation. So Doug, hi.
Hello.
Thanks for agreeing to come on It's All About Choices. How you doing?
Thanks for having me.
You well?
So you just want me to start with where I ended up?
Oh, let's talk about, we first met in 2005, didn't we? And
yes.
I chose to leave IBM to work in what I now know as London Square Mile. I didn't have a clue what that was when I first came to the office. But let's not start there. Let's talk about how we arrived there, or especially how you arrived there, because you came from an entirely different route. And I'd love it if you could share the choices that led you to the day we met.
I guess starting out, it all kind of began when I first I grew up in Kentucky, as you mentioned, the youngest of 10 children. I studied mainly music. I played the viola, and I had excelled at some classes, but other ones, I to be honest, I really wasn't that strong of a student, I guess you could say. And at the age of 19, I decided at that point, was probably the biggest choice, one of the biggest choices I ever made, was to basically leave Kentucky and move to South Florida, which I had the intent of studying radio broadcasting because my oldest brother works in radio in Boston, and I thought it would be something interesting to do. Long story short, didn't work out. So I guess it could initially have been seen as a wrong choice, but where it led me turned out to be probably one of the best choices ever made in my life. So I guess long story short, ended up going from Florida to North Carolina briefly, and then ended up in Boston, which is where my oldest brother lives. And I didn't really even know him that well at the time. I had grown up, he was 17 years older than I am. So I barely even knew him up until after I moved there, really. So, but when I first moved there, started fresh, the only real kind of skills I had were, I guess, typing and word processing, marketable skills, I guess you could say. And so I did mainly clerical work, I did, medical transcription initially, and then I ended up, I guess one of the key changes was becoming the PA to the head of an IT department for a small kind of energy related nonprofit organization. And it was a relatively small company. And I was kind of sat there near where all the IT support people work and everything. And, people would come up looking for help, and I just kind of found it kind of second nature, really, to help them with their issues. Because a lot of the times the guys were busy or they weren't around or something like that. And I guess one of the key, opportunities, I guess you could say, was that the IT support manager, who had become a friend of mine, was saying, you seem to have a knack for this. Have you thought about, do you want to learn more about IT support and things like that? And I was like, sure, because the PA stuff, it really wasn't taking up all my time, and I had a general interest in computers and technology and things, I guess you could say. So little by little, I started getting more and more involved with, setting up and configuring PCs, Macs, printers, things like that, troubleshooting, doing basic network admin, and the like. And I guess one of the key choices that came out of all that was, at one point, my friend, the IT support manager, who I'm still in touch with today, actually, he came to me and said, have you ever thought about doing this full time? And this was 1992, I believe it was. Yeah. And so he goes, have you thought about doing this full time? And I think at the time it was, working in IT was it paid quite well. And at the time, especially, a lot of it was new. And he referred me to a guy he knew within the industry who worked at a company called Corporate Software. And it was a company that sold software to companies, but they also did support for them. And it turns out that the company had also been subcontracted by Microsoft to do support for them for, I think it was DOS, Windows 3.1, Windows for Workgroups, Office when it first came out. It was Office 4.0, 4.2, like 26 low density floppy disks to install. So that was the kind of the key choice for going directly into IT and working in IT full time. And that was, I think it was later in 1992, I believe. So I went there. They had Microsoft on site training people, doing, actual Windows certification courses. And then from that day on, you're doing, you're sitting all day taking incoming phone calls for people that are on the surface, they're calling Seattle or Charlotte, North Carolina, and it's coming through to Boston. So we basically had to say we were in somewhere else, actually. But that was probably one of the key roles I had that led me to Fidelity, in that I did, I made a lot of contacts while there. There was a lot of people there. I mean, I was one of two groups of maybe 60 people, all the same age and everything, new to IT. People came and went, and a lot of us kept in touch. So it was kind of it's almost like university, actually, to be honest. It was, a lot of camaraderie.
University of life.
Like yeah, exactly.
And do you mind if I ask?
Sure.
Sorry, I know the story, and I put it in the promo, and I'd love to get it in. So I know you were in that University of Life, but we've known each other for a while now. But I didn't know this until we talked about this episode, where as you were going through that University of Life, you'd chosen to move kind of across states in the United States, which is big enough. I mean, if it was here in Europe, I'd probably be somewhere down in the south of Spain, in the distance,
Yeah.
which would be a massive choice. But for two reasons. One, because I find it an interesting choice, but also the circumstances that surround it. Is it true that kind of the choice to move to the UK was kind of fermented in a hot tub?
It was actually. And the backstory to that is I think after I was at this corporate software place doing Microsoft support for probably, I started doing Windows 3.1 and then went into Windows for Workgroups and Office and Excel support specifically. After about a year and a half, it was just nonstop phone calls all day. So I wanted something kind of different. So I ended up it was a market research company called IRI Software, which is part of Information Resources. Don't know if you know it. It's one of the big, I think the big competition is Nielsen, like Nielsen ratings and those kind of things.
Okay.
So it's all market research and things. But I ended up going there because they were coming out with a new Windows-based product and they wanted to enhance their Windows support that was being provided. And they had me supporting a new Windows version of their product globally. So I was working very closely with colleagues in that company from all over the world. And also a lot of the clients and customers were all over the world as well. So I think that kind of got me interested in the beginning. And I guess the key thing that planted the seed or the idea that it could actually be a possibility was we had a global user conference in Orlando, Florida. And we had all these different events and everything where we're meeting the clients face to face. We're meeting their colleagues from all over the world were there as well. So we had, like a couple of big nights out and everything. And I ended up at the hotel in the hot tub with some of the people from our Sydney office that were there. And I had always kind of gotten along with them quite well. And they started talking to me and they're like, well, what do you want to do next? And blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, I'm not quite sure exactly. So they're like, well, why don't you come work in the Sydney office? We're looking at a new kind of, it was kind of a new piece of software. They're looking for somebody to kind of do like pre-sales and support around, I guess, Australia, Southeast Asia region. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yeah, right. Yeah, whatever. Thinking, that's like the other side of the world. What am I going to do? And I was 21, 22 at the time, I think. No, sorry, I was 23. My bad. And I was like, there's no way something like that could actually happen. And then they actually lined up an interview for me that I had. It was like late at night or something their morning. And this is all after the conference, obviously. And the interview process, it was about 90% there. And around that time, Oracle bought out like the technology part of the business, and there was a reorg. And around that time, the newly appointed person in the Sydney office, like the head of, there was a lot of politics there and things like that. So it wasn't a good scene. So I basically came down, and then I did have a big choice then, because around the same time, a friend of mine who I had worked with at the corporate software place had moved on to go to Fidelity.
Right.
And he was doing, he was a diehard techie guy. He had like servers and PCs and everything all over his house and everything. So he calls him up and says, oh, we're looking for like a hands-on support person for the institutional division. And my kind of viewpoint was, well, I've never done hands-on support before. I've only done phone support. And he was like, if you can visualize it, you can do it. So, which there's a lot of truth in that, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I'd spent so much time like guiding people through step by step, doing things and describing things. It's just second nature to do hands-on. So around the same time, I was kind of approached about that. That was initially a contract role at Fidelity. And so I went through the interview process with that. So at the time when I was at the information market research place, my boss was aware I was talking to the people in Sydney. And so at the end of the day, I had an offer on the table from Fidelity, and Sydney, I kind of had an offer, but I wasn't quite sure about it because of the, political situation there and everything like that, within the office anyway. Because I think some of the people that I knew were looking to leave the company, and it would have been a whole different dynamic just going there without knowing anyone, that kind of thing. So
yeah, it's a big choice as well.
So
I guess.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, because there's a good different geographies, but a synergy there. I think there's two elements. So obviously you made that choice to go to Fidelity when you had two on the table, two life-changing choices, I guess. And I think there's some synergy there in that you knew somebody at Fidelity. When I came into Fidelity, I knew a fixed income trader, Andy, who we had a weekend in Brighton. And I think that pretty much set the scene for my life in Fidelity, really, nights out. And he said, "Oh, you should come and work here. We need someone like you," with no real idea of what I did, and me with no real idea of what he did. Much more of an idea now. So I think we both arrived with a similar path, albeit from different areas. And then you mentioned nights out, and I think Fidelity, when I joined. Well, I think anybody who works in that area, very, very different to IBM, where it's very commercial focused. This was very much a relationship business. Who you built relationships with, how you manage those relationships, and how you dealt with them, as much outside of work as inside of work, could really heavily influence the success you had in that business. And so when we arrived in 2005, it was pre-crash. And there was an awful lot going on in the city at that time, both work-wise and fun-wise. Yeah. But I think what I find interesting about our entry points is that they're very similar. We had similar choices, albeit distance was massively different. When you reflect back on working at Fidelity and that choice you made to come over to London, I mean, I believe that's changed your life. I think you've lived in Europe ever since. But how do you look back on 2005 and what we were doing and kind of what would you think today about the person you were then, and what advice would you give them in terms of the future from then?
I would say 2005. I had been in the UK almost 4 years or so at that point. So I was definitely settled in. I was contemplating going for the passport as well. Mm-hmm. I was still on a work visa at the time. So I was thinking at the time, because I was on a 4-year work visa and I was coming to the end of that, and then it was indefinitely to remain, which I think you're fine as long as you're not like unemployed for any length of time or something like that. But I think at the time I remember being very kind of apprehensive about going for the UK nationality, I guess, because I wasn't sure, why I wanted to get it, and what kind of opportunities could it pose, I guess you could say. Yeah. And I mean, I ended up getting the passport in early 2007. I think it was February 2007. And at the time, I'd gone from doing like desktop management to service management specifically, after which point was when you were hired. At the time, I think it was I think looking back in our roles and everything, you're definitely right. It was all about like relationship building, especially with, the customer base that we had, which was, very critical roles like fund managers and traders and analysts. All the analysts want to be a fund manager, so everything that's keeping them from doing their job is making them look bad. And there's a lot of egos to deal with and personalities and a lot of challenges, really. But yeah, I think leveraging, as you've said before, leveraging the PAs was very beneficial. Making relationships with like the head of trading and the traders as well, especially.
And I think that's where you really helped me, because I came in from a commercial background, and I was brought in for that commercial background to help with contracts, help with service levels. And for those that aren't aware of what a service level is, who are watching, it's basically an agreement as to when you sort things out. So I was brought in for that, but the culture shock was huge. And luckily for me, you'd been there for a few years, so you were able to guide me on, you need to go and work with these people. As you say, the PAs and the coordinators, they're the ones that really make things happen. They open doors for you, and if you get on the right side of them, you're going to be successful. If you just sit and choose to go down the commercial route, you're going to get nowhere with this organization. That was a real opener for me.
Yeah, and I think that was a big thing for me. I think one of the reasons they created it was around the time like 2003, 2004 when ITIL was, really catching on. I think at the time it was being pushed from the top down in Fidelity, and I think it was just the end of 2003, early 2004. They were looking to kind of restructure IT and create for the first time a dedicated service management function. We still had a local service desk at the time that was being outsourced to India. So we were looking at, what do we do with these service desk people? We were looking to make them into like service delivery analysts, I guess, at the time. And I think a lot of the reasons that were made to switch me into that role was very much based on the relationships that I had built as the desktop manager in the previous 3 years before that.
And I think, if you don't mind me saying, it all relates back to that role where you were working as a PA and they said, you've got a knack for this. And the knack probably wasn't at that time the technical skills, it was the service skills that you have, the ability to work with people, and which people forget in technology.
Well, I think these days as well, doing a lot of phone support roles, which, to be honest, there aren't really much of those local anymore. That in itself probably builds a very good foundation for, customer service. You need to like guide the conversation, you need to guide the call. You have to make sure that there's no like silences and you're not leaving the customer hanging, that kind of thing. So I think it does go a long way in building the foundation for, and then doing hands-on support as well on top of that. That's where you get face-to-face. So there's the body language, there's everything. It's a lot about communication, ownership, fundamental skills, which I think these days it's I wouldn't say it's rare, but it's growing more and more uncommon, I guess you could say.
I think you could be right, and I think there's a common theme that I've run through all of my shows so far, that pretty much everybody started life in a service desk of some way, shape, or form. I think the other challenge that we faced at Fidelity is you'd be doing that whilst running the gauntlet of wads of paper being thrown at you, being shouted at, or being hung over because you had to go out the night before to really get on the right side of the traders. This series is not about going out and drinking and getting hung over. It's about making choices. But that is a particular choice that had to be made in those scenarios, was stepping beyond merely servicing and supporting people and actually understanding the pressures they're under so that you can give them a much better service. I think that's
Yep.
where our service management function was sort of dovetailing between, as you say, ITIL kind of methodologies and frameworks, and just getting down and dirty and getting a job, and also building those relationships. And again, I go back to saying, without the likes of yourself there and many others who worked at Fidelity, I would have drowned in that pool of craziness had it not been for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, you had come in with probably the most ITIL knowledge than pretty much all of us, and I remember.
I think I wore my badge.
Did you?
I think I did. Yeah, I feel really embarrassed about that.
That's pretty sad. No, I mean, I remember they had started doing things. We really had to push for like ITIL foundations to be done within the IT department, because we were like, especially things like change management, incident problem management, those kind of things, release management, major incident management, those were never really all that formalized prior to this existing. Yeah. So I remember we had a lot of kind of challenging conversations with some of the, infrastructure teams and things like that to make sure things were doing the right way, because we were pretty much the go-between between, fund managers and the CEO and everything, who we also had a really good relationship with, I remember.
Absolutely.
So yeah, challenging times, but it was good. It
was fun. And I think we'll kind of move on from that period in a second, but I think that role, bear in mind, as you say, I came in ITIL, so I was kind of dyed in the wool ITIL, dyed in the wool IBMer. Over the period of time, that 2005 to 2007, if you recall, the role changed from IT service manager to business relationship manager, and that was driven mutually between ourselves and the business, because what we ended up doing was managing the relationships between the IT teams and the business. And I think that was if I'm honest, and without wanting to boast, that is a massive milestone of success as to what we achieved, because there was no there was a lot of trust in the desktop guys and everybody that was hands-on. There was less trust in us trying to do the communications and control things in the back end, and I think we were able to build that trust. And again, that wasn't just you and I. That comes down to the whole team, but it comes down to people choosing to go the extra mile. And I think everybody in that team, it's probably the hardest working and the hardest playing team that I've ever been involved in. And I remember when I left in 2008, I was just physically broken, mentally drained, but it was great fun. And let's go to that time, because I mean, you then took a big choice to go to Luxembourg. As I mentioned before, I ended up getting the UK passport February 2007. I had no plans to go anywhere or even thought about it, but I think it was that summer. I remember just kind of being in a, just happening to see on the, the intranet job postings, internal postings, technology manager for Luxembourg. And I was like, that sounds interesting, because one of the things I kind of wanted to get in, I kind of wanted to do service management, but also kind of get back a little bit closer to operations, and also get some experience overseeing infrastructure to some degree as well, because I hadn't really had that in the past. So I wanted to kind of, but I looked at the role and it looked interesting to me. I didn't know anything about Luxembourg or where it even was. And I remember just asking somebody about it, and they knew somebody over there. I think it was Sven, who you might have known, German guy. Yeah.
Yep. I remember just getting in touch with him out of the blue. No idea who he was or anything. But he was like their kind of local IT rock star guy. And just kind of learned a little bit about it. Ended up doing and the more I thought about it, the more I was like, it would be interesting, because I had moved over to kind of, I wanted to see, I came over because, I hadn't really traveled much before I left the US. And I I really wanted to see Europe and experience a lot of different cultures and things like that. And I was just interested by all the different history, the languages, the food and everything, and the people. No, so put food before people. But,
you meet people while you're eating food.
Exactly. But so I saw this role, and I had a chat. I read up on Luxembourg, and I was like, this could be quite interesting, both from a career perspective and a personal perspective. And I ended up formally applying for it and getting it. So I ended up moving September 2007, overseeing the technology support for Luxembourg. Was kind of the hub for Central Europe, for continental Europe, sorry. And but there was also I think it was 14 other locations in about 12 countries. So the job another thing that was attractive about the role was that I would be going to these other countries from time to time, not always, but just having that opportunity to, go to Paris on a regular basis, or Madrid sometimes, and things like that was quite attractive.
Yeah, I bet. And again, it's a massive choice for somebody that comes from Kentucky and down to London to do that. I think it's And I guess for those watching, unlike some of the previous guests where we've not sat down and spoken for 20 years in some cases, Doug is one of those people that I've been fully in touch with and speaking with ever since we worked together. So I'm a bit more intimate with Doug's journey. So, so I know that you
coming back. Yeah.
Yes, I mean I recall you're coming back, and you and I worked again together in 2015 and 2018.
Yeah.
You don't. I wouldn't mind trying to bring us further up to date with the time we've got left, because like me, you chose to kind of utilize your skills and experience as a consultant in 2015. We've taken fairly different paths. So in your case, you've gone and worked in fashion, building data center services, if I remember correctly, for huge fashion retailer. Not enough people watch this. I could get in trouble for ASOS. I think you've worked John Lewis. So you've kind of you've gone investment banking, fashion, but the one I'm really keen to learn about on your journey, because we didn't have much time to talk about this when you were doing it, and people will understand why when I say what it is during the pandemic you were working with the Department of Health and Social Care, helping them kind of develop test and trace. So huge piece of work. I can't imagine the pressure you were under, and I just know I didn't see you for like a year and a bit because it was so busy and lockdowns and so on, obviously. But if you could bring us up to that'd be great as much as you can. I think that's just an awesome choice.
I mean, after going into consulting, I ended up doing a few different stints at different retail companies. John Lewis was the last one, but I was on a kind of a long-term contract with John Lewis when it came to end of 2019, early 2020, 2020, and me being one of and I was doing service introduction for John Lewis for different projects and things, and then when the pandemic hit and the first lockdowns happened, I think it was like March, April, around that time. My contract was cut short, to be honest, and it was all budgetary and everything. They were, they're cutting projects, so I basically had no portfolio anymore, other than one or two things, and they, consolidated those amongst the full-time people. So,
of course,
so by the time the DHSC role came along, which wasn't, I mean, I finished with John Lewis end of May. And it wasn't, and so by the time the DHSC role came along, I guess you could say I was desperate to find something new, because it was early October, I believe it was. So it was over 5 months. During the time, I wasn't able to find anything new. It was just very difficult, as most people doing consulting or even full-time people at the time. It was just a very bad time to be looking. And then just kind of out of the blue as a result of the what's the LinkedIn group that we're part of with David?
Oh, the contractors group. Yes, the IT
Yeah,
contractors
that's the
group.
one.
Yes.
Yeah. So through that group, which I had joined, I think at your recommendation, probably a couple of months before, I just happened to see a guy who was the director of service management for the DHSC had posted something about looking for roles, service introduction or service transition roles specifically. So I just sent him a reply. He said PM me, so I PM'd him, and we basically just, that was on I think it was on a Tuesday. This kind of gives evidence to how quickly things can happen, especially when you think you've lost all hope, basically, of finding something. I was in touch with him on a Tuesday, Wednesday. He said, "Can we have a chat on Friday afternoon around 3?" I remember having like a 30-40 minute conversation with him via YouTube or Teams, and sorry, not YouTube, Zoom or Teams or something. And he was like, "Well, I won't know for sure about something until probably middle of next week. Is that okay if I get back to you then?" I said, "Yeah, fine. I'm flexible." And then out of the blue, he calls me up an hour later after I hang up with him, and he's like, "Can you start on Tuesday?" So
It's mad.
Yeah, and I started kind of. I didn't quite have a contract fully in hand and signed off. So he explained to me. He's like, you're going to be, slightly at risk, but it's going to happen. And I didn't know the guy, but I really. I think you've spoken to the same guy. He seems very trustworthy. He's very kind.
Great, yeah.
I think he's specifically like looking to help and pick up people who had been impacted by the pandemic. And I ended up finding it. Well, it's kind of ironic that what ended up making me lose my role and be out of work for 5.5 months helped me get the role back again.
Yeah.
So the role at DH. So I guess at that point, I didn't really have much of a choice, to be honest. But at the same time, I did have a choice, obviously. But
yeah, I think it highlights the choice that we make as consultants. For anyone that's looking to come and become a contractor or a consultant, the choice is you get flexibility, you get control over your destiny to a point, and when you don't have control, it can come out of nowhere. And I just there
is a certain level of volatility.
Yes, yeah. We both spent a lot of time discussing whether we would go out on our own. Probably as early as 2007, and neither of us did it till 2015. So I think there's a whole series of choices behind that. But I think what you're highlighting there is that sometimes choices get taken out of your hands. But I had a slight insight into what you guys were doing, and obviously I think the country knows what you were doing. But it must have been a hell of a piece of work to be involved in.
Yeah, the first project I was given for service introduction was because you're not just working with DHSC, you're also working with NHS Digital. You're also working with I can't remember what the other name of the laboratories agency and some other agency as well. So it's a lot of different organizations going on for the same purpose, and I think one of I'd say the first project I was working on was a massive a data infrastructure upgrade in order for it to be able to handle the volumes, because the infrastructure that was initially built I think it was 2007 or 8 or something I think initially it was for smallpox or something like that. So so it was never meant for the volumes of test data and things coming through it that started to see. And I think you might have seen in the news about something being down to an older Excel version and having limitations and crashing or something like that. And that's what this project was going to remedy, because it was all going to be cloud-based. It was going to be scalable. It was all all that. So there's a few different transitions involved with that. But on top of that, the head of service delivery, he contacted myself and got another couple guys, like a change manager and a process manager. He was like, how familiar are you guys with like JSON files and like Google map pins and things like that? And we're like, never done it before, but we'll give it a shot. So and at the time, I think, as you may recall, I think it was probably late. When was it? I think it was later that year. So it was, I think, December.
Yes.
Around the time when all the councils started offering testing sites and things like that. These were like asymptomatic testing. So, and you probably still can, but you were able to go to a website from the DHSC, and you were able to link to your local area and see pins that show all the different test centers around your area and their hours of opening. And if I remember initially we were showing if they were what kind of the footfall levels were. So were they busy? So we had like green, amber, red, which could denote to people, during a pandemic, if it's super busy and there's a lot of people there, you don't want to go there at that time, obviously.
Yeah.
So, and it was also, yeah.
I was going to say, I recall you were talking to me about that, and you were showing me Liverpool. And for those that know me, I'm a Liverpool fan, and I remember saying to you, "Don't put one near the Everton ground because no one will go there."
There was one.
There was, yeah.
Liverpool were the pilot, so we ended up starting out working with Army people on the ground who were running the test sites initially, and local council people in Liverpool and the surrounding areas around there. And then once that, and at the time, the updates for the pins on the map had to be done manually through a JSON file. So it was Liverpool first, and then I think we did the second pilot site was in Wales, and then that started growing. So we ended up with like 30 test sites around the Liverpool region, probably 15 or so around it was Merthyr Tydfil. I'm probably butchering the name, but something like that.
No, perfect.
Okay, good.
I think your 30 years in the UK have paid off. It's good. You've got it. I hate to cut there because we're running close to time, but I think it's just such an incredible piece of work, and I really felt it was worth sort of talking about it so people could understand sort of the complexity of what was happening. When people are reading the news and obviously reading maybe some negative connotations around the inner workings and impacting people, but there was so much work going on in the background to get it up to speed. So, I mean, that kind of brings us up to date. I know now that you're off to Italy next week. You are working with a brand that I think will be close to your heart, Campari, the alcohol company. But so in a couple of minutes we have left, what's your next set of choices? What are you thinking next? Going back to the States, staying in the UK? What are you looking at?
I'd say the first. Well, I've been thinking kind of longer term what I want to do, as far as staying in the UK, staying in Europe, going back to the UK. Going back to the US. And I guess a lot of it will have to do. I mean, I know, as you mentioned, I've been with Campari since July last year. They want to expand my role to be like overseeing the global central functions, which are very critical, like finance, supply chain, and all that, from a service management standpoint. And my contract through the end of this year. And the director of global service delivery has already had a conversation with me about, he wants to create a role reporting directly to him, starting from next year. So I guess that will be my first big decision, I guess you could say, will be to whether I want to go full time with Campari. And I think the more I think about it, the more I like the idea. Because I like the company, I like the people, and it kind of reminds me of working at Fidelity almost to some degree, where we actually care about the company doing well and the people and helping them and things like that. And I've not really found that so far, or had that kind of as an opportunity, I guess you could say, since I guess 2012 when I came back to the UK.
Wow. Well,
so that would be probably my first decision. And then I guess if the decision is to go full time, it would be a UK based role. But that could pose some possibilities where, could I spend some time working maybe in Italy, because my main focal area would be Central European time, Milan, essentially. Could I spend some time working there? Could I potentially end up moving there at some point someday? Don't know exactly. And then I would weigh the, have to do comparison against, working and living in Italy versus working and living in the US. And I think to me, Italy sounds more attractive because, you're living in it's a beautiful country. It's a warmer climate. There's so many different other countries and things around there. So I think that could be somewhere I would end up looking at. And, maybe look at 10 years down the road, looking at semi-retirement or something. Because I think working and living in somewhere like Italy, if you're like one of us where we've grown up in, like the US or the UK, I think it would almost be like a working holiday almost.
Let's hope so.
Not to downplay the work involved, but you know what I mean. At the end of the day, you're in Italy. I would definitely prefer to live like outside of the city, in somewhere kind of more rural, I guess you could say. But then there's challenges of fast Wi-Fi and things like that too. So,
well, I think they sound like
yeah.
Well, I think it's fantastic. They sound like some great choices to have in front of you. I think sounds exciting, and all I can say is to sum up, thank you very much for joining me today to sort of go through those choices. I think they, it illustrates that sometimes massive choices are just presented to you. Other times they're taken from you. Sometimes you spend a lot of time thinking about them and end up doing something entirely different. So I think it's a great conversation piece.
Sometimes
Thank you.
Just kind of go with the flow, which I've done a lot of that as well.
Well, that's brilliant. I like that. Well, thanks, Doug. I really appreciate it. It's been great to have you on, and hopefully those watching have got some use out of it. I just want to say on the next episode of It's All About Choices, it was great that we actually finished talking about travel, because I'm going to be talking to two people who are going to be talking to us about emigrating to the other side of the world, juggling marriage, family, and careers. I'm going to be joined by Bex Doherty, who's a people and development professional, and James Doherty, who's a project manager. And we will talk about how we and Doug worked together in Fidelity, the choices that they made to arrive at that point in London, the choices they've made since. And also we'll touch on their choice to host my wife and some friends on the other side of the world when we undertook an adventure in 2010. So I'm looking forward to that one. But thanks again, Doug. Really appreciate it. And please join me next time for It's All About Choices. Thank you.
Thank you.